It was 1947, and Dave Thomas was 15 years old, living in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and his father had just told him the family was moving again. For most kids, this would be frustrating, but for Dave, it was just another day in a life that had never known stability. His adoptive mother had died when he was 5, and since then, his father had remarried 3 times, and they'd moved more times than Dave could count. But this time, when his father said they were leaving, Dave made a decision that would change everything. He looked at his father and said, "I'm not going." Dave had finally found something that mattered to him. He'd been working at a restaurant called the Hobby House, and he loved it. And so, at 15 years old, Dave Thomas dropped out of high school, moved into the local YMCA, and started working full-time. And here's the thing, Dave would later call dropping out the biggest mistake of his life, but it's also the decision that eventually led him to build a $4 billion fast food empire. So, how does a high school dropout with no money and no family support end up creating Wendy's, one of the most successful restaurant chains in history? Well, dropping out wasn't laziness. Dave had been working since he was 12 years old, and he had this obsession with restaurants, not just with food, but with how they operated, why some succeeded, why others failed, what made customers come back. He'd watch everything, and when other kids his age were out having fun, Dave was standing behind a counter, studying, learning, absorbing, and all that. Moving, all that instability, it actually gave him a skill. He learned to read people, to understand what they wanted, because when you're constantly the new kid, you get really good at figuring out what makes people tick. At 18, Dave volunteered for the Army. He specifically requested the cook and baker's school, and the Army made him a mess sergeant in Germany, responsible for feeding 2,000 soldiers every single day. And he became one of the youngest soldiers ever to manage an enlisted men's club. When he got out in 1953, he went back to the Hobby House, married a waitress named Lorraine, and started a family. But then something happened that changed everything. A guy named Colonel Harlan Sanders started coming around, trying to convince restaurant owners to convert their places into Kentucky Fried Chicken franchises. The Hobby House owner eventually bought a KFC franchise, and Dave and the Colonel just clicked. The Colonel saw something in this young cook, something hungry, something driven. Then in the early 1960s, Dave's boss came to him with a proposition. He owned 4 KFC franchises in Columbus, Ohio, and they were failing badly. And he told Dave, "If you can turn these restaurants around, I'll give you a 40% ownership stake." Even Colonel Sanders told Dave not to do it, but Dave saw something everyone else missed. Dave looked at these failing KFCs and realized the problem: they were trying to do too much. So he simplified the menu, drastically focused almost entirely on fried chicken. That's it. He came up with the rotating bucket sign and convinced Colonel Sanders to appear in television commercials. And within just a few years, Dave completely transformed those 4 restaurants. And in 1968, he sold his stake back to KFC for $1.5 million. He was 35 years old, and suddenly he was a millionaire. But Dave couldn't retire. The restaurant business was who he was. So he started going to different hamburger places around Columbus, and he kept thinking, why is nobody making a good hamburger? Frozen patties, sitting under heat lamps, getting sad and dried out. And Dave thought hamburgers are the most popular food in America, and nobody's doing them right. So on November 15th, 1969, he opened the first Wendy's in Columbus, Ohio, and named it after his 8-year-old daughter, Melinda, whose nickname was Wendy. Dave's concept was built on everything he'd learned. First, the burgers would be square. When you put a square patty on a round bun, the corners stick out, and your brain thinks you're getting more meat. Second, the beef would be fresh, never frozen. This was risky because fresh beef costs more, but Dave knew people could taste the difference. Third, Dave refused to use heat lamps. Every burger was made to order, and when you make someone wait, when they watch it being prepared, it actually tastes better because they've invested time in it. And Dave positioned Wendy's differently. He wasn't trying to compete with McDonald's on speed. He positioned Wendy's as the place for people who cared about quality but still wanted it fast, and the growth was insane. In 1972, Dave started franchising by 1976. They'd opened their 500th restaurant in 1978. Less than 9 years after opening, Wendy's opened its 1,000th restaurant, and by 1979, they had 1,767 locations and hit $1 billion in annual sales, the first restaurant chain ever to reach $1 billion within 10 years. But then Dave retired in 1982, and without his obsessive attention, things fell apart. The company tried launching breakfast but couldn't make it fast enough. Franchisees cut corners and sales dropped. By 1986, Wendy's posted a $5 million loss. The new president begged Dave to come back, but on one condition: Dave had to become the face of the company and do the commercials himself. In 1989, Dave appeared in his first commercial, and it was terribly stiff and wooden. The critics hated it. Still, then the ad agency tried something different. They made him self-deprecating, folksy, and suddenly it worked. People loved him. They saw their neighbor, this regular guy who really cared about making good hamburgers. And over the next 13 years, Dave appeared in more than 800 commercials, more than any other company founder in history, and 90% of Americans knew who he was. And here's what's powerful: Dave always regretted dropping out, but he worried his success might inspire other kids to drop out too. So in 1993, at 61 years old, Dave went back to school and got his GED. He founded the Dave Thomas Education Center and became a huge advocate, telling every teenager, stay in school, don't make my mistake. And Dave never forgot he was adopted. So in 1992, he founded the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption. He lobbied presidents, testified before Congress, and in 1996, President Clinton signed a bill granting a $5,000 tax credit to families who adopt, crediting Dave for making it happen. Dave Thomas died in 2002 at 69. By that time, Wendy's had over 6,000 locations, and in 1994, the chain had achieved $4.2 billion in sales from one restaurant to a $4 billion empire in 25 years. But the real lesson isn't about hamburgers or franchising. It's that your circumstances don't define you. Dave had every excuse to fail: adopted, orphaned, moved, constantly dropped out at 15. But he had something more valuable. He had work ethic, obsessive attention to detail, and the ability to learn from everyone around him. And here's what people miss: dropping out wasn't what made him successful. He succeeded because he never stopped learning. He spent 25 years studying restaurants from the inside. And when he opened Wendy's, he wasn't guessing. He knew exactly what he was doing. Dave used to say, "You can do what you want to do. You can be what you want to be. There's no one to stop you but yourself." He proved it. The high school dropout who lived in a YMCA at 15 became one of the most successful restaurateurs in American history, not by taking shortcuts, but by working harder, learning more, and caring deeper than anyone else. Maybe that's the point. Success isn't about where you start. It's about what you do with the hand you're dealt. And Dave Thomas played his hand perfectly.